Hello everybody friends, welcome back to Max Talks About Writing Advice. Today's question is coming in from one of my awesome patrons, and we're gonna be talking about dialogue. What exactly? Well, my top 3 tips for writing dialogue. Before we go anywhere, allow me to give you the formal disclaimer and remind you that the following is merely my advice, my opinion, and what worked for me. Don't take it as gospel, instead take it as the ramblings of a person who had a mic problem at the beginning of this video. My god! Wow, I nearly thought my mic had died, and that would have been awful. Now, today's question came in from one of my awesome patrons, Amy Rose, and she was wondering if I had any tips for writing dialogue, which I do. Now, before I go into my 3 tips, I want to kind of give you tip 0, which is kind of the tip that actually started this conversation. One of those big tips that goes out, to people who want to learn how to write better dialogue is to go out into the world and listen to people talk. This is good sometimes and not so good other times, primarily because dialogue can be so weird and sporadic. I mean, dialogue is the one part of the act of telling a story that doesn't have to follow any rules whatsoever. Like splices, broken sentences, run-ons, all those things can run on dialogue. Why? Because people don't follow the rules when they talk. Now, do I think this is the most useful of tips? Not necessarily, because, again, everybody talks differently and everybody talks in their own special way, so kind of telling people to go out and listen to a particular group of people is not exactly effective. So there you go, that's like tip 0 for you. I don't exactly think it's entirely bad, it's just, I think there are other things we can talk about, such as... Alright, let's get the quick and easy writing tips out of the way right now. What is my number 1 tip for writing dialogue? Read it out loud. No, seriously, this may sound a little silly to some people, but reading out your dialogue, reading it out loud as you're writing it or revising it, can give you actually a pretty good insight into the way your character says things, which can help you go and pump that extra flavor into your narration. And I'm not gonna lie to you, if I'm at the office writing and I'm all alone, I am most definitely reading out my story as I'm typing it. Because ultimately, when you get down to it, writing is the act of storytelling. Like the way stories were shared a million years ago, through voice from one person to the next. Probably not exactly a million years ago. I'm not sure if a million years ago we were still around. Probably not. But I think dinosaurs also shared things through voice and roars and other dinosaur-like sounds. Silliness out of the way. Silliness out of the way. I do mean it though. I actually, some people think that's weird. That's okay. I actually like to read the entire story as I'm writing it. It does not only give me an insight for punctuation, but it also, it helps me get into the mind of someone who's sharing a story. I think that when it comes to writing, getting into the mode, or, into like the zone for writing can be incredibly difficult. And for me, I've just built this ritual of, sitting down, putting on music, and start reading out what I'm writing, because it makes it seem as though I am indeed, or the narrator is indeed sharing you a story. So there you go, my first tip is as simple as reading out your dialogue. It really does help. I'm not gonna be dwelling on this too much, because kind of everybody talks about this. Like, the 2 big tips that I hear everywhere is listen to people talk and read it out loud. So you probably already heard this, it's probably not new for you, so instead let's dive into a tip that probably you have not heard before. Tip number 2. The purpose of writing is to show how your character expresses themselves. Allow me to repeat that. The purpose of writing is to show how your character expresses themselves, and in turn, show how they view the world and the people around them. Because after all, what we say about the world shows what we think and how we feel about the world. Now, some of you may be thinking, where is this coming from? This is really random. Why is Max telling you this? I'm saying this because I personally believe that dialogue and exposition don't go well together. And to be entirely honest, I have to come out and blame movies for this. A lot of people are like giving advice on dialogue, and they're like, watch movies and the way people talk, and I don't necessarily agree with that, because movies generally don't have the ability of having a narrator, which means that exposition needs to be done either through flashbacks or through characters letting us know what happened before. Now, some of you are probably thinking, that doesn't sound like a bad thing. There's no way that could throw me off of a story or sound awkward. Let me give you an example. Imagine 2 women in a living room. It can be any type of living room you want, just a particular living room. The first woman pulls out a letter that she received, reads it, and with a shocked look on her face says, "Oh no, James, he's coming back." At which point her friend turns to her and says, "James, your father, the man who left you at the orphanage years ago?" Yeah, as opposed to what? Her other father, who is also named James? Do you notice what I'm talking about here? It's the idea of stating the obvious. In the situation that I posed, the two ladies know what they're talking about. There's clearly no way the friend could have actually confused the idea of James with anybody else but the person who would have caused that reaction on her friend. Now, if you're asking me, hey Max, what is the number one thing that throws you out of the story when it comes to dialogue? It is stating the obvious, and it is clearly giving us exposition, heavy-handed exposition through dialogue. And I totally understand this is probably just a me thing, but it really does throw me out of the story when a character starts spouting information that the reader needs to know. It feels incredibly out of place and not human, and it feels like movie dialogue in which, because of the lack of a narrator, the story needs to actually explain the backstory through the character's dialogue. And of course, you don't need to do that because you are writing a story. You have the act of writing at your hands and you are able to use a narrator to give us this information. My thing is this, okay? People don't state the obvious, almost to a fault. I think one of the best things about people talking with people is the fact that we never state the obvious. We never actually openly state our assumptions. The assumptions are always in the background, and there's kind of this animosity between people talking. You know, does she think that I think what she thinks I think? Again, this is probably just a me thing, and it's entirely likely it's a me thing, but I feel that exposition and basically informational dumps are better left in narration so that dialogue itself can just be a place for characters to express themselves, characters to show the way they view the world through their words and their actions. Now, one final little itty-bitty note before I move on to the third tip. I'm not kidding you when I say that exposition in dialogue is like my biggest problem with dialogue. I honestly feel that that is like the biggest culprit, the number one cause for like dialogue that throws Max out of the narration. It is characters stating the obvious and just delivering information that makes no sense for people in that relationship to say to one another. And if you can minimize that, then you're set, you're golden. Because I don't know for you, but for me, my biggest complaints about dialogue is when dialogue throws me out of the story. And generally it involves with basically reminding me that I'm reading a book. Because most often than not, I am willing to give the writer the benefit of the doubt when a character states something that seems slightly out of character, because there's probably a reason behind that, or a character says something in a very strange way. I give you leeway on those. The ones that I don't give leeway on is when a character is clearly just giving me an informational dump that just reminds me, hey, by the way, Max, all this information is important. Oh, by the way, you're reading a book. Again, that's just how I feel about things. With that being said, though, let's move over to tip number 3. I stumbled like 3 times on that sentence. Now, Amy Rose, the person who sent this question, I am going to apologize to you right now, because you already know this tip. So, for the next question that you sent, I'll give you 1 extra tip to make up for that, okay? For everyone else, here is my number 3 top tip for writing dialogue, okay? Revision. You don't need to get the dialogue right the first time you write the story. Hell, you don't need to get anything right. Let me just open up right now and just tell you about what I'm doing right now as of the recording of this video, okay? I've spent the last couple of weeks editing a book that will be coming out soon in my time frame. Hello, people from the future. And I've been doing a lot of cleaning, a lot of revising, and like basically reading the same passages over and over and over again until I make sure that I am happy with them. And I've been doing a lot of work with dialogue recently. That's actually one of the things that pushed me to make this video and to talk about this number 3 point. And it's the idea that you don't need to get things right. I wrote this book and I realized, wow, I like this line that I wrote, this character saying this line, but you know what? It doesn't make sense for her, and it doesn't fit the way her character is, so I changed it, you know? Having a little bit of distance and coming in with the mindset of creating a better story just goes a long way. Now, of course, I'm not gonna leave you there. I'm gonna give you a little bit extra because I find that I tell people, revise, and they're like, what do you mean by revise? How do I know how to revise? And I'm gonna give you a little secret, okay? Almost nobody is going to tell you this, but I am going to tell you this, okay? Consider your main character. The main character you wrote in the first third of the book is not the same person you wrote at the end of the book. Not because they changed throughout the story, but it's because you, as the writer, had to get used to writing those characters. Seriously, I'm not kidding you. In my personal experience, most of my editing time goes on patching over the first third of the story in which I was getting used to the characters, to the way they were, to the person they were, and just making things seem a little even and more organized than before. So you may be asking yourself, Max, how did you know that that one really cool sentence didn't belong to the character? Well, because by the end of the story, when I had gotten used to who she was and the way she behaved, she would not ever say that. And it's not because she's changed as a character, there are certain parts of her character that would not change, such as a particular way that she spoke. And I realized this really cool sentence that I wrote in the first chapter no longer fits. Again, I really do mean it. Revision is such an important part of the act of writing. I don't know who started this, but there's this idea of getting things right the first time. And one, I don't think that could happen. And even if it could happen, you should still revise your story anyway to make it a better story possible. Now, I know that revision can be incredibly daunting, and the idea of getting things right the first time can be incredibly daunting. So you know what? I'm going to do this for you right now, okay? If you're in the middle of writing a story, if you're in the middle of the first draft, I am giving you the Baymax approval to actually not have to worry about any of this. Not like and any other element of fiction. If you're in the middle of writing the first draft, don't worry about dialogue, don't worry about theme, don't worry about character motivations. Just get in and get that story written, okay? Baymax approved. Silliness out of the way though, I really do mean it. If you're in the middle of writing a story, don't worry about any of the writerly things. Get that story written, get it done, and then you can worry about those things later. Trust me. The revision process needs to happen and you need to do it, but it's a lot easier to deal with things when you know that, you know what, there's going to be a time when I'm going to have the license and the need to worry about getting the story to be its best version of itself possible. And that includes dialogue. Dialogue can be incredibly daunting, and I want you to know that you can always make it better. And I am in the middle of making it better, and I'm in the middle of revising a story and looking at a piece of dialogue and in a very Oscar Wilde-esque way. Like, I read a sentence, I put in a comma in the middle of the day, and at the end of the day, I take out that same goddamn comma, okay? It's a lot of looking at things and revising and looking through them again, okay? Is it a long process? Yeah. Is it daunting? Yeah, understandably so. But it's worth it because you have done the hardest part. Once you have the clay and the material to work from, everything else is easy. In summary, here are my top 3 tips for revision. Tip number 1, read it out loud. Tip number 2, don't state the obvious and keep exposition out of dialogue. And number 3, revise. You can make it perfect later. I hope that helps. I hope that if anything, I have given you another point of view when it comes to dialogue. And I want to take a moment right now to thank my awesome patrons, the people who directly support me, my videos, and allow me to create more content for everyone. If you would like to learn even more about how you can become a patron and how you can earn a ton of awesome perks for as little as $1 a month, such as behind the scenes vlog where I reveal all of my secrets, and writing advice priority, which means that you get your writing advice questions answered first before everyone else. If that interests you at all, you can check out the link in the description below, or you can head over to patreon.com/mkieran. As always, like, subscribe, do all of the socially related things, and I want to thank you, yes you, for spending a little bit of your day with me. I'll be seeing you soon. Mwah. So originally when I was brainstorming this video, I came up with a really incredibly dark and morbid outro, and it was really creepy and like really dark, and I thought, you know what, let's not do that. Instead, I'm gonna close with something a little silly, such as today's video was absolutely not brought to you by Disney and Baymax. Fun fact, do you think that you have no ability to affect my life whatsoever? Fun fact, you're wrong. Go follow me on Twitter and tweet at me, and you will probably get me to reply to you and share funny pictures with you and be silly. For instance, one of my longtime followers, Hippo Music, 4 numbers, I forget what they are. Her name is Kendra. She got me to buy this Baymax. She made me do it. It's all her fault. If you want me to do other things and be the fault of my problems, go ahead and follow me on Twitter at Mr. Kieran and tweet at me funny pictures and stuff.